Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to our Listen to the Missus podcast. I'm Art Lewis.
I'm Ann Williams.
And we talk about recipes and lifestyle and helpful hints and household. And we do it with you on these podcasts, and we're delighted to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. And today we've got a variety of topics to talk about. We're going to talk about graduation party food safety.
Right.
And I have another list of substitutions that we've been doing, and you've got some goodies for us.
Yeah, well, last time we talked about yogurt and the different things that a tub of yogurt is good for and different things you can do with it. This time we're taking another food like that you might have around, mayonnaise. Oh. And we're going to explore different things you can do with that. You know, we know that mayonnaise is good for sandwiches. A lot of people like it on sandwiches or, to bind up a salad, But you can do other things with it as well. This is something that I've heard about but have not tried. But have you ever heard of using mayonnaise instead of butter when you make a grilled cheese sandwich?
Sounds
vaguely familiar?
It rattles around my brain.
It's been out there. They say that it is really a nice alternative to using butter if you're making a grilled cheese sandwich.
And apparently it browns nicely.
It browns really nicely. It adds sort of a tangy flavor to it. And it complements, like sharp cheddar or American cheese.
Sure. So
give it a try.
Why
not?
I
like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing is you can use it on grilling for vegetables and fish. If you just kind of brush a little bit of mayo on your vegetables.
I wouldn't have thought of that. That's pretty clever, actually.
They say, well, you've heard of, I think it's called elote, the Mexican street corn. Mayonnaise is used on those. The ears of corn are grilled, and part of the coating that is put on there is mayo. Mayo and sour cream, actually. And then cojita cheese is added to it and spices like chili powder. But, so it's used on the Mexican street corn. They say it's really good on fish.
That I've heard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that I've heard.
Mm-hmm. So, another thing to try.
And it's funny because my substitution list later, I'll jump ahead just for one here, because one of the things I was going to offer up was a substitution for mayonnaise.
Yeah.
Which goes back to what you talked about on the last podcast, because 1 cup of mayonnaise, you can substitute 1 cup of plain yogurt.
Yeah.
Or a cup of sour cream.
Right.
Also works. Mm-hmm. So that
and if you're worried about fat, substituting the yogurt is, will get you there.
Yeah.
Usually, yeah. And depending on what
healthier,
kind of
you would think.
Yeah. Another thing you can do with mayonnaise, though, is to thicken sauces. Apparently, it can be a good thickener for a pan sauce, just like butter is. And you might notice a theme here. A lot of times, mayo is a substitute for butter because there's a lot of oil in it.
Yep.
So another thing is you can bake with it. You've heard of like a chocolate mayonnaise cake.
Oh, absolutely.
And guess what? I have a recipe for that we're going to share in a moment.
Oh, all right.
But, it's really good for baked goods because, again, it adds moisture. It substitutes for the butter and probably adds a little bit of a flavor twist as well.
Sounds good.
Mm-hmm. So here's this is from our Listen to the Missus files that we've, many, many recipes
accumulated over 60 years or thereabouts.
So here's one. It's called chocolate mayonnaise cake, all right? It calls for 1.5 cups of sifted flour, 3/4 of a cup of sugar, a teaspoon of baking soda, 2/3 of a cup of strong coffee. Now, coffee is often used in this way because it enhances the chocolate flavor. A 1/2 cup of mayonnaise, 1/3 of a cup of chocolate syrup, a tablespoon of vinegar, a teaspoon of vanilla, and a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, all right? So this is going to be just a 1-layer cake. You grease an 8-inch square pan. Stir in the flour, sugar, and baking soda. Add the coffee, mayonnaise, syrup, vinegar, vanilla, and salt. Mix well. Bake at 350 for 30 to 35 minutes or till done. Cool it on a rack. And then if you want to, you can put a doily on the top of the cake and sprinkle with powdered sugar to make a real pretty pattern on the top.
Fancy.
Wouldn't that be pretty?
Fancy. All right.
Yeah.
You may have another recipe we'll get to, but I want to take a few minutes out here because This is the season for graduation parties and other parties. We're getting into that outdoor season. You'll be grilling outside. Maybe you'll have friends and family over. Maybe you'll have potlucks and all of those
showers.
things. Our friends at the Saginaw Public Health Department put together a list of information gathered from the USDA Food Safety and Inspection Service on how to handle graduation party food safety.
Yeah, you don't want anybody to get sick at your house.
No,
how embarrassing.
No. So I thought we'd pass this information along. If you're hosting, say, your son or daughter's graduation party or attending a party, keep food safety in mind. The combination of large amounts of food, buffet-style meals, and summer temperatures increase the risk of foodborne illness, and we all want to avoid that. So before you have your party, here's some questions to ask yourself. Are you going to cook the food with the help of friends, or are you hiring a licensed caterer? 2, do you have enough refrigeration space or enough coolers and ice to keep the foods in the back cold? 3, how will you keep the hot foods hot? 4, do you have enough serving utensils? 5, do you have a food thermometer? And 6, are the hosts keeping the food safe and at proper temperatures if you're a guest? And I look at that. I walk around, and there are times at buffets I won't take certain food because I'm just not sure.
Right.
So here's some key points. Remember always to wash your hands. This is in every food safety piece of information you're going to get. Number 1.
That's pretty basic. Wash your hands.
Always wash your hands before and after handling food, and keep the food area, dishes, and utensils clean. Set up a hand washing station with warm water, hand soap, and paper towels for you and guests to wash their hands. Encourage guests to wash their hands before going through the serving line. Put up a little sign or something. Why not? Consider making a sanitizing solution with bleach to wipe down the tables and the chairs. Think of that, because the chairs and the tables your guests sit at can carry the bad stuff, and you don't want that to happen. And, of course, most graduation parties are buffets. It's best to put the food out in small containers. If you've got 30 or 40 people and you're making a big pile of potato salad, don't put it all out at once.
Yeah.
Get yourself a series of small containers. Put the first one out in an ice bath. When that goes out, then just take the next container and stick it in there.
Yeah, get some disposable containers. Make it easy on yourself.
The foil containers you find, they're perfect. And you keep the rest refrigerated. And you replenish the food in a clean container. Change the utensils. By the way, we don't think of this either. They say change the utensils every 4 hours, or when you change the container.
Yeah, because the food on that gets old too.
And typically, the container's not going to last 4 hours, particularly in the beginning. So just have other utensils available to swap them out. Temperatures are important. Remember that bacteria grows between 41 degrees Fahrenheit and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. So using ice is an option, obviously, to keep cold foods cold, and use chafing dishes to keep hot food hot. And use a crock pot or warming trays for certain types of food. And lastly, try to keep the food covered if it's a buffet. If it's outside in particular, you don't want to attract flies and insects. So there's some help from our friends at Saginaw Public Health Department. They have a website, by the way, no matter where you are in the country listening. You can go to www.saginawpublichealth.org and find most of this information.
Yeah, and lots more information,
And just
too.
one more thing about temperatures. Remember that it's a cumulative thing. If we tell you that from the time you put food out and it reaches that 41 degree to 135 range, you have 4 hours. That is cumulative, which means if it's been out for an hour in that temperature range and then you refrigerate it, the next time you put it out, you only have 3 hours. If it's been out for 2 or 3 hours, the next time you only have 2 or 1 hour.
Okay.
So just remember, keep track of the time.
So the clock doesn't start over again if you bring it back up.
No, it does not. It continues. So there you are, some graduation party food safety items.
Very good to know. Well, continuing with our mayonnaise theme, I have another recipe. This is a classic from our files that I don't know if other parts of the country have this food. I would assume so, but bar cheese.
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
like here in Michigan we have Windschuler's bar cheese,
Famous.
but other kinds, yeah, you find it in the dairy case with all the other cheeses. But this is a really good like spread for crackers and other things, good for snacking or cocktail parties or any kind of appetizer.
Let me guess, it's going to use mayonnaise.
It's going to use mayonnaise because we're talking about mayonnaise and how to use it different ways today. This recipe is pretty simple. It calls for 12 ounces of Velveeta cheese. I'm sorry, not 12. My glasses are failing me. 32 ounces, okay? So lots of Velveeta cheese, 1.5 cups of mayonnaise, quite a bit of mayonnaise, 8 ounces of horseradish, 7 drops of Tabasco sauce, and 9 drops of Worcestershire sauce. So again, 32 ounces of Velveeta, 1.5 cups of mayo, 8 ounces of horseradish, 7 drops of Tabasco, and 9 drops of Worcestershire sauce. And this just gets all mixed together, and you melt it until smooth in the microwave or stovetop. About 30 minutes on the stovetop it's going to take, so just melt it all together. And then put it in whatever container you want to use, cool it, and you can serve then after it's chilled.
And you don't have to whip this one.
You don't have to whip it. No. If that would help you, to use something to mix it, you
or
could.
If you wanted to make it a little lighter
make it creamier.
in texture.
Yeah, depending.
Sure.
That's depending on how you want it. But it's a really good, yummy snack with crackers or whatever.
All right, let's talk about some substitutions, because the last couple of podcasts I've been talking about them and filling in with different ones. So I'm going down the list. I'm getting toward the end of the list now of our substitutions. Let us say your recipe calls for a teaspoon of lemon juice. You could use a half a teaspoon of vinegar, or a teaspoon of white wine, or a teaspoon of lime juice.
Okay.
If you didn't have lemon.
So those are all things that add acidity. Which,
they all add acidity, exactly. Yeah. We talked about mayonnaise. You can use a cup of sour cream or a cup of plain yogurt to replace a cup of mayonnaise. Parsley, fresh parsley, a tablespoon of chopped fresh parsley. You can use a tablespoon of chopped fresh chervil.
Okay.
Or, if you really want to, you can go to the teaspoon of dried parsley. And remember, when you substitute dry for fresh, it's always less of the dry than the fresh. Raisins.
Okay.
You say, what can you substitute for a raisin? Well, if you need a cup of raisin, how about using a cup of dried currants, or dried cranberries, or chopped pitted prunes?
Yeah.
You can substitute for raisins.
That would work.
Ricotta cheese.
Ah, yes.
If you need a cup of ricotta, you can use a cup of dry cottage cheese, or a cup of silken tofu.
Okay.
They work.
Well, I know some recipes for lasagna call for ricotta, and that's the traditional ingredient, but others call for cottage cheese. So
It works either way. Sour cream. If you need a cup of sour cream, you can use a cup of plain yogurt, or a tablespoon of lemon juice or vinegar and enough cream to make 1 cup, or 3/4 cup of buttermilk mixed with a 1/3 cup of butter.
Wow.
And that will make sour cream.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
We talked about how sour cream and yogurt are pretty much interchangeable on a lot of recipes.
Absolutely. Soy sauce. Here's another one I wouldn't have thought. How are you going to get a substitute for soy sauce? If you need a half a cup of soy sauce, you can replace it with 4 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce mixed with 1 tablespoon of water. And that will give you a soy-like sauce, if you will.
Okay.
And just a couple of more on my list here. Wine. Let's say your recipe calls for a cup of wine. Some people just don't like, either they don't use alcohol at all, or they don't like cooking with alcohol.
Or they just don't have it on hand.
Or they don't have it on hand, exactly. You could substitute for a cup of wine a cup of chicken or beef broth, or a cup of fruit juice mixed with 2 teaspoons of vinegar, or just put in a cup of water, because basically you're putting in the liquid. You won't get the flavor from the wine, but you get the liquid. And lastly, and we've talked about this in reverse, a cup of yogurt.
Yes.
You can substitute a cup of sour cream or a cup of buttermilk or a cup of sour milk. All of those are suitable replacements.
It's
So
good
there
to
you
know
go.
because that frequently happens. You know, you're at home cooking something, you want to cook something, you don't have just one ingredient. And it's helpful to know what you can do instead. Mm-hmm. For sure.
Well, that'll do it for the Listen to the Missus podcast for today, but we'll be back with you again soon. I'm Art Lewis.
I'm Ann Williams.
Thanks for being with us on our podcast.